Mossfield did not ask much of its people. This was, depending on your disposition, either its greatest quality or its most damning one. There was a bakery, a blacksmith, and a library. The library was Aurora's. Not in the official sense. She did not own it, only ran it, had been running it for 2 years since old Mr. Fenwick's eyesight made the cataloging impossible, and he had handed her the keys with the solemn ceremony of a man entrusting someone with a child. She paid a modest rent to the village council, and opened the door every morning at 8 with the same quiet satisfaction. It was a warm building, small enough to be intimate, large enough to feel like a world. The shelves reached from floor to ceiling on 3 walls, filled with books in varying states of age and dignity. She was 24 years old. She woke each morning in her grandmother's cottage. Her cottage now, technically. She walked the 10 minutes to the library through Mossfield's quiet morning streets, nodding to the baker, and arriving at the library door with the key already out and her mind already inside. Her grandmother had passed 2 winters ago. The first winter had been the hardest, not because of the practical things, those had been difficult enough, but because of the specific kind of aloneness that arrives when the person who has always been at the end of your day is simply no longer there. She was not unhappy. This was the truth she told herself, and also the truth she told Lena and Petra when they pushed. Her only 2 friends. Lena and Petra were the loudest parts of Aurora's quiet life. Lena worked at the bakery. She was round-faced, brown in complexion and quick-laughing, with the kind of personality that filled rooms without trying, the kind that made silences feel rude and conversations feel like festivals. She had strong opinions about bread, about men, about the precise amount of butter that constituted a reasonable portion, and about Aurora's romantic life. She was marginally more restrained than Lena in her interference with Aurora's personal life, which is to say she waited a full 10 minutes into any conversation before engineering it toward the subject. She loved them entirely and allowed them approximately 40% of the influence they attempted. "You should come to the tavern Thursday," Lena said on a Wednesday morning, elbows on the library's front desk, chin in her hands, watching Aurora reshelve a stack of returned books with the focused efficiency of someone who finds spatial organization genuinely satisfying. "Petra and I are going. There are apparently some new travelers in the area, real ones, not just the merchants." "I have reading to do," Aurora said. "You always have reading to do. You live in a library." "That is, in fact, the reason I always have reading to do, yes." Lena made a sound of profound exasperation. "Aurora, my love, the books will still be here on Friday. New travelers will not." "Then they are temporary," Aurora said pleasantly, "and it seems unwise to rearrange my Thursday for something temporary." Petra, who had been examining a book of botanical illustrations near the window with genuine interest, said without looking up, "She has a point, Lena. We should have opened with something more permanent." "You are supposed to be on my side," Lena told her. "I'm on Aurora's side. I'm always on Aurora's side. The difference is I'm trying to help her and you're trying to satisfy your curiosity about the travelers." "I can do both," Lena said, are entirely without shame. Aurora smiled at the shelf she was facing and said nothing and continued to reshelve, and the morning continued around her in its warm and ordinary way. She did not go to the tavern Thursday. She had reading to do. The morning the triplet Alpha Kings arrived was a Friday. She remembered this specifically later, not because Friday was remarkable, but because Fridays had a particular texture in Mossfield. Aurora had been open for 2 hours. She had a cup of tea going cold at her elbow. She always made tea and then forgot to drink it. Had been doing this her entire adult life with a consistency she found both amusing and mildly embarrassing. And then the quality of the light through the library's front window changed. She picked up her pen. She put it back down. And something in her chest had gone very still. Her body was doing something her mind had not authorized. She was sitting up slightly straighter. She was facing the door. The door opened. The first thing she noticed was the height. The first man through it had to dip his head. Not dramatically, just slightly, with the ease of someone long accustomed to a world built a fraction too small for him, who makes the adjustment without thinking. He straightened on the other side. He was extraordinary. Light brown-skinned and broad-shouldered, dressed in plain clothes that somehow did not make him look plain at all. The way a mountain does not look small, simply because it is not decorated. His face was sharp-featured and composed, wearing an expression of careful neutrality that had clearly been placed there deliberately over something considerably less neutral underneath. His eyes moved across the library with the swift, comprehensive attention of someone reading a room for information. Then they found Aurora behind the front desk, and stopped. Everything about him stopped. He simply stilled, completely, like a compass needle that has been spinning and has finally, without warning, found north and locked there. Something moved across his face. She could not name it precisely. It was too quick and too large and too composed almost immediately after. But in the half-second before the composure returned, she saw it clearly. Something quiet and devastated and relieved all at the same time. The specific expression. She would think much later of a man who has been holding his breath for a very long time and has just been given permission to exhale. Aurora sat completely still behind her desk. The second man came through the door. Same height, same light brown skin, same extraordinary quality of presence. But where the first one had gravity, this one had warmth. He came in with his eyes already moving warmly over the space, already finding the good things in it, the way warm-natured people do instinctively, cataloging what they love rather than what they need to assess. He found Aurora. He smiled. Not a polite smile, not the social smile that people produce for strangers, a genuine smile, with something in it that was private and warm and knowing somehow, which made no sense at all, because she had never met this man in her life. The third man came in last. He was identical to the other two in face and form in the specific, slightly disorienting way of identical siblings. The same bone structure, the same golden eyes, the same build, and yet entirely, immediately himself. There was a quality to his stillness that distinguished him at once from the other's stillness. He looked at her, that was all. He simply looked at her. And Aurora, who was 24 years old and had lived a quiet and perfectly sufficient life and was holding a pen she no longer remembered picking up, felt something in the center of her chest that she had no name for arrive very suddenly and settle in like it had always been meant to live there. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was entirely steady. She was rather proud of this. "Good morning." The first man's voice was low and even, calibrated to the quiet of the space in a way that suggested he was someone accustomed to adjusting his presence to rooms rather than expecting rooms to adjust to him. "We're looking for a book." "That is the correct place to be," Aurora said. The second man's smile widened. The first one's mouth did something that was not quite a smile, but was in that territory. A movement at one corner, brief and involuntary, as if something she had said had reached him in a way he hadn't entirely prepared for. "Do you have a particular title in mind?" Aurora asked, setting her pen down with the careful deliberateness of someone ensuring their hands were doing something ordinary and purposeful. "Or a subject?" "We are not certain yet," the first man said. He moved further into the library, not toward the desk but toward the shelves, the way people who genuinely love books move when they enter a library, pulled by some current that predates the specific intention of their visit. "We may be here for some time." "That is also the correct way to be here," Aurora said. The second man laughed. It was a real laugh. Brief and bright, entirely unguarded, and it did something inexplicable to the temperature of the room. He turned from the shelf he had been looking at and looked at her directly. "You have the same eyes," he said, as someone I once met." Aurora blinked. "I'm sorry?" "In a forest," he said. "A long time ago. Someone who was lost and didn't particularly act like it." He tilted his head slightly. "Though she had your eyes, same shape, same color, same quality of looking at things directly without flinching." The third man, who had been standing near the poetry shelf with one hand resting lightly on the spine of a book, turned his head slightly at this. Aurora looked at the second man and felt the strange, untethered feeling of something rising from a very deep place in her memory. Something that had no clear form, only a quality. A feeling. A forest smell. The amber light of an afternoon that had been bigger than it was supposed to be. "That's a very specific thing to remember about someone you met once," she said. They stayed for 2 hours. The first man, he gave his name as Jorah when she asked, and offered it quietly with the focused attention of someone who understood that names were not casual things, moved through the shelves with a methodical thoroughness that suggested he was genuinely reading spines, genuinely looking. He selected 3 books, carried them to the reading table by the east window, and sat there with his back to the wall and his face toward the room in the specific way of someone who had spent a long time in situations where knowing what was behind you mattered. He did not read immediately. He sat for a while first. And in that while, his eyes found Aurora at her desk with a regularity that she noticed and then noticed herself noticing and then deliberately stopped noticing by becoming extremely interested in the Northern folklore volume. The second man, Bale, he said, with the same warm ease with which he apparently did everything, did not sit. He wandered, which was clearly his natural mode of being, moving along the shelves and pulling books out and reading a page and returning them, asking Aurora questions about the collection, with the engaged curiosity of someone who found other people's particular enthusiasms genuinely interesting rather than merely politely so. What were her favorites? What did people in Mossfield read most? Were there books she had ordered specifically for particular readers, or only for the general collection? Had she read everything here? "Not everything," she said. "Only most things." "What haven't you read?" She pointed at the agricultural almanacs on the bottom shelf. He looked at them. "That seems reasonable." She smiled. He watched her smile with an expression she would think about later, in the quiet of the closed library, an expression of someone in the presence of something they have been looking forward to for a very long time. The third man, Caden, barely spoke. She learned his name because Bale used it, calling across the library to ask his opinion on something, and he answered in 2 words and returned to his browsing with the unhurried self-possession of a man who was entirely comfortable in his own silence. He moved through the shelves slowly, touching nothing he did not mean to touch, reading with the careful, full-body attention of someone for whom books were not entertainment, but conversation. When they left, Jorah paused at the door. He turned back. He looked at her across the length of the library, past the shelves and the reading tables and the afternoon light coming in at a slant through the high windows, and he looked at her with those eyes that had unsettled her from the moment he walked in, the ones that were too certain for a man she had never met. "We'll come again," he said. It was not a question. "The library opens at 8, Aurora said. "Every day except Sunday." He nodded once. Something in his face shifted, that same barely there movement at the corner of his mouth, the one that lived just next door to a smile. Then they were gone. Aurora sat very still for a moment. Then she got up from her desk, crossed to the front window, and looked out at the street. They were walking away, all 3 of them, and moving in the easy, unspoken synchronicity of people who have been moving alongside each other for so long that they no longer need to negotiate the shared rhythm of it. Jorah in the middle, Bale to his left, already saying something with his hands, Caden to his right, listening without looking, his face turned slightly toward the street ahead. They did not look back. She stood at the window until they had turned the corner at the end of the market street, and the space they had occupied was simply street again. Cobblestones, an afternoon light, and a cat sitting philosophically on a window ledge across the way. She stood there for another moment after that. Then she went back to her desk. She sat down. She looked at the Northern Folklore volume, still open to the page she had been cataloging when they arrived, or her notes beside it in her careful handwriting. She picked up her pen. She put it back down. She did not know those men. She had never met those men. And yet, something in her body had responded to them with a recognition so deep and so immediate that recognition was barely the right word for it. It was less like meeting people she had known and more like a key turning, like a thing that had been held very still for a very long time, patiently, without complaint, finally being released. She told Lena and Petra about it that evening. Not everything. She could not have said what everything even was, but the surface of it. 3 strangers. Identical, which was strange enough on its own. Golden eyes. The things the warm one had said. Lena. Dark-haired, brown skin. Immediate. The kind of person who processed experiences outward rather than inward, put down her tea and said, 3 identical men walked into your library and you waited until now to tell us? I'm telling you now, Aurora said. Are they still in the village? I don't know. They said they'd come back. Lena and Petra exchanged a look that Aurora recognized as the particular look of 2 people conducting an entire silent conversation at speed. Aurora, Petra said carefully, in the voice she used when she was being diplomatic about something she felt strongly about, are you aware that you are doing the thing with your hands? Aurora looked at her hands. She was pressing the tips of her fingers together in a slow, repeated gesture she had apparently been doing for the last several minutes without noticing. She put her hands in her lap. I'm perfectly fine, she said. You look, Lena said, studying her, like someone who has just read the first chapter of a very good book and is trying to pretend they don't already know they're going to finish it in one sitting. I met 3 strangers in the library, Aurora said. That is all. Said Lena. Said Petra. Aurora drank her tea with great dignity and said nothing further. But later, much later, alone in the cottage in the dark, with the curtain moving in the cool night air and the familiar lavender and wood smoke smell settling around her like something kind, she lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling and let herself think about it in the private way that she had not allowed herself all day. 3 of them, 3 identical faces, 3 pairs of golden eyes, 3 presences that had filled her small library and made it feel both smaller and larger at the same time. 3 men who had looked at her, all 3 of them, each in his own distinct way, with the quality of recognition, as if the library and its librarian were not a discovery but a destination. You have the same eyes as someone I met once, a long time ago. She frowned at the ceiling. That is an absurd thing to say to a stranger, she thought. I should not still be thinking about that, she said. She thought, in her village, in this world, a woman belongs to one man. Everyone knew this. It was not a rule so much as a fact of the shape of things, the natural and unquestioned architecture of how life was arranged. 3 men, she thought. The word sat in her chest in a way that was confusing and warm and completely unreasonable. 3 who looked at her like she was the end of a very long journey. She pressed her hand against the center of her chest, where the unnamed feeling lived, and felt it. Steady, patient, persistent, like a candle that had been lit quietly and was not going to go out. She thought about the one who had looked at her from the window, in the afternoon light, with all that quiet patience in his face. She thought about the way the middle one had said, "We will come back," not like a possibility, but like a weather forecast. She thought, half asleep, about bread divided into 3 pieces in a forest she had been lost in once, a long time ago, when she was very young. She did not make the connection. She was almost asleep. But the warmth in her chest did not go out. It simply waited. Across the village, in the modest rooms they had taken at the inn, 3 identical men sat in the shared quiet of people who had grown up sharing everything and had never needed to perform for one another. Jorah sat at the small table by the window. He was not reading the book open in front of him. He was looking at the middle distance with an expression that was slowly, privately, coming undone at the edges. Bael lay on his back on the bed nearest the wall with one arm across his eyes, and he was smiling. The kind of smile you smile when you are alone, the real kind, the kind that has nothing to do with anyone watching. Caden stood at the window. He looked out at the dark village lane. At the library down the road, its windows dark now, its door closed. He stood there for a long time. He had waited 16 years to stand this close to the direction his whole body had always pointed. He could wait one more night. Just one. He was still at the window when the sun came up. Caden had not moved from that spot since midnight. Standing in the dark of the inn room, looking down the empty village lane at the small library with its closed door and its dark windows, his hand pressed flat against the cold glass. Behind him, Jorah sat on the edge of the bed, awake and silent. Bael was lying down but not sleeping, staring at the ceiling with his arm folded behind his head and a quiet smile on his face that had been there for hours. None of them had slept. None of them had needed to. "Tomorrow," Jorah said quietly, to no one in particular. "Today," Bael corrected, and nodding at the pale morning light beginning to press through the curtains. He sat up, stretched. The smile hadn't moved. "It's already today." Caden said nothing. He just turned from the window, picked up his coat, and headed for the door. His brothers followed without a word. They already knew where he was going. Aurora was shelving books when the door opened. She heard it, felt it more accurately, that specific shift in the air she had already, without meaning to, learned to recognize, and she turned around slowly, like someone trying not to reveal how much they were hoping for exactly what they found. All 3 of them, filling the doorway with their impossible identical faces and their quiet golden eyes and the particular presence that made her small library feel both smaller and more alive at once. She turned back to her shelving. "You're early," she said. "We were awake," Bael said simply. She heard him pull out a chair at the reading table, then the soft sound of Jorah settling into his usual seat, the one to the left, the one with the clear view of her desk that she had noticed him choosing every single time and had been pretending not to notice. Then nothing, which meant Caden, because Caden moved through spaces the way shadows moved, present but quiet. She felt something touch the edge of the front desk. She finished shelving her book before she looked. A single flower, dark purple, the last of the autumn, still holding dew on its petals like it had been picked very recently. Very early in the morning, before sunrise perhaps, from somewhere along the cold road. Aurora picked it up, and she looked across the library to where Caden was already standing at the far shelves, his back to her, one hand resting on the spine of a book he was not reading. She put the flower in the glass with the others, one folded note she had not thrown away. She went back to work and tried very hard to remember what work felt like when this was not also happening. Jorah read, or at least, he held a book open and turned its pages at intervals that suggested reading. But twice Aurora looked up quickly, the way you look when you feel eyes on you, and found him watching her with that still, concentrated look, the one that felt less like being observed and more like being held. Carefully, like something that mattered. Both times she looked away first. Both times she found a reason to move to the other side of the library. Both times he waited, patiently, for her to come back. Bael, meanwhile, had decided that the library needed reorganizing. Not officially, not loudly. He simply began picking up books from various places, reading their first pages, and then appearing at her elbow with them. "This one opens terribly," he told her, very seriously, holding up a volume of romantic poetry. The first line is upon the verdant meadow of my longing. What does that even mean? It means the author was in love and bad at beginnings, Aurora said. Most people are bad at beginnings, Bale said. He looked at her sideways. Are you bad at beginnings? She took the book from him without answering. She could feel him smiling as she walked away. She could also feel, in the most inconvenient possible way, that she was smiling too. She shelved the poetry collection in the back where she hoped he wouldn't find it again. He found it again within 10 minutes. The following day, Lena and Petra came to take her to lunch. Lena came through the door first, scarf half unwound, already talking. Aurora, you have to come now. Petra bought the most disgusting jam at the market. We need a second opinion. She is defending it. She stopped. All the words stopped. Lena had seen them. Petra walked in behind her and went equally still, for the same reason. Aurora watched her two best friends look at three identical, extraordinary men standing in various parts of her library, and she watched the exact moment the calculation began behind Lena's eyes. It was not a cruel calculation. It was not even an unkind one. 3 men, 3 women. Lena's best smile appeared. The real one. Well, she said softly. Hello, said Bale, because Bale greeted every room he entered like it had been waiting for him, which, Aurora reflected, it usually had. Hello yourself, Lena said, and her voice had gone warm in a specific way that Aurora recognized and felt the very first cold thread of something uncomfortable pull through the warmth in her chest. She made the introductions. She had no choice. The room had already made them. Lunch was all 6 of them at the round table in the bakery window, and it was, objectively, if she could have stood outside it and watched, a wonderful afternoon. Bale made the whole table laugh within 5 minutes. Real laughing, the helpless kind, because he told a story about a market vendor and a goat and a complete misunderstanding involving a wheel of cheese. And even Jorah's mouth curved at the corners, and Aurora watched Lena watching Bale with bright, open delight and felt the cold thread pull tighter. Jorah spoke carefully and precisely the way he always did, and said something to Petra about the village market that was so specifically observant, noticing something about the way the stalls were arranged that Petra herself had never consciously noticed but immediately recognized as true, that Petra looked at him with the slightly startled expression of someone who has just been seen clearly by a stranger. Caden sat beside Aurora. He said almost nothing to anyone at the table. He ate his soup. He listened. But he was close, his shoulder near hers, his presence a steady warmth along her left side, and once when she reached for the bread at the same moment he did, their hands met on the board and stayed there. 2 seconds, maybe 3. Long enough for Aurora to lose the thread of whatever she had been about to say and not find it again for the rest of the meal. He placed the bread quietly beside her bowl and went back to his soup as if nothing had happened. Her cheeks were warm for 20 minutes. Walking back, Lena tucked herself against Aurora's side with the energy of someone who had been waiting patiently and was finished waiting. Aurora. They're guests in the village, Aurora said. 3 identical guests. I'm aware. Bale. Lena's voice went soft in a way Aurora had only heard a handful of times in 12 years of friendship. He listened to every word I said. He looked at me like I was interesting. You are interesting, Aurora said carefully. Yes, but he knew that. Immediately. A pause. Are they staying long? The question landed somewhere in Aurora's chest and sat there like a stone dropped in still water. I don't know, she said honestly. Because, Lena said, and her voice was gentle, trying to be kind. There are 3 of them. And you, Aurora, you spend every day with them, but you never talk about them. You never say anything. And I think... Another pause, more careful this time. I think maybe you're not the only one who might want to. Aurora said nothing. Petra, on her other side, said nothing either. But Petra glanced at her. One quick, quiet look, and in it was something that was not Lena's open warmth. Something that was more like a question, a measuring. Are you going to say something, or are you going to leave room for the rest of us to try? Aurora looked straight ahead. She thought about the flower on her desk this morning. She thought about, "What is your favorite season?" written in small, neat handwriting. She thought about 3 seconds with the back of her hand warm against his. She said very calmly, "I don't have any claim on them. They can talk to whoever they like." Lena squeezed her arm. "Good," she said, warmly, happily. The cold thread in Aurora's chest pulled all the way through. The next morning, Lena arrived in her best dress. Petra had done something careful with her hair. They came together at 11:30, and Aurora took one look at both of them from behind the front desk and understood exactly what was happening, and felt everything in her chest rearrange itself into something that hurt in a way she had no right to feel and felt anyway. Lena went directly to Bale, not watched it, and understood, miserably, that Bale's warmth was simply who he was. He could not help being that warm. He had probably been that warm since the day he was born. It meant nothing specific. It was not aimed at anyone in particular. Except, she was not sure she believed it anymore. Petra had positioned herself near the window where Caden stood. She was saying something about the book in his hand, tilting her head, and keeping her voice light. Caden was listening with his usual patient courtesy, giving her the minimum of what politeness required. And then something happened. Petra laughed, brightly, prettily, and touched his arm. Just for a second, just her fingers on his sleeve. Caden looked down at her hand, then he looked up. Across the entire library, over Petra's shoulder, past all the shelves and all the space between them, his golden eyes found Aurora's face. He didn't look confused. He didn't look apologetic. He looked at her with an expression so direct and so clear and so completely unconcerned with anything happening in the room except her that the breath went straight out of her body. Aurora felt her face go warm. She looked down at the desk. She looked up again. Caden had stepped back from Petra, just slightly, just enough, and returned to his book. Petra blinked, her hand still loosely in the air where his arm had been. Aurora's heart was doing something loud and rapid and unprofessional. She pressed both palms flat on the desk. She thought, "Say nothing. Feel nothing. You have no claim. This is none of your business." She thought, "He looked at me." She thought, in the middle of all of that, he looked at me. And she was still thinking about it, still holding it in her chest like something lit, when Lena leaned across the desk toward her with bright eyes and said quietly, delightedly, "I think this is going to work." Aurora opened her mouth, closed it. She had no idea in that moment what she was going to do. She had no idea what the right thing was. She had no idea what she wanted, or what she was allowed to want, or what any of this was, or what the shape of it was supposed to be. What she did know, the one thing she knew with absolute, terrifying certainty, was that when Caden looked at her across that room, something in her had answered, and it hadn't answered quietly. That evening, after Lena and Petra had gone and the library was empty and the last lamp was burning low, Aurora was putting on her coat when she noticed something on the window ledge. A folded piece of paper, where she always left his. She had not left one today. She opened it. One line, his handwriting, simple as breathing. "We did not come here for anyone else." Aurora stood in the empty library with the note in her hands and the lamp throwing gold across the floorboards and her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her throat, and she thought, "We. Not I. Not one of them. We. All 3 of them." She folded the note, put it in her coat pocket with the stone. She walked to the door. She put her hand on the latch. She stood there for a very long moment, because if that note meant what she thought it meant, then nothing about her life was going to stay the shape it currently was. Not the library, not the village, not the version of herself she had carefully built and lived inside since her grandmother died, and the most frightening part, the part that kept her standing at that door in the low gold light, unable to make herself leave, was that she was not sure she minded. She opened the door and stepped into the night. 3 pairs of golden eyes watched her from the darkness across the lane, 3 pairs of golden eyes in the dark. Aurora stood in the library doorway with the note still warm in her coat pocket, and her heart doing something it had never done before, not racing exactly, more like recognizing. Like a sound you have heard in a dream, and then one morning you wake up and hear it in real life and every hair on your body stands up at once. They were across the lane, standing still, not hiding, not approaching, just waiting, the way they seemed to do everything, with a patience so complete it felt like a statement. She should have gone back inside. She should have said goodnight and locked the door and walked home and made her tea and been sensible. Instead, she stood there in the cold night air and looked at them, and they looked at her, and nobody moved, and the whole village lane was absolutely silent except for the wind moving through the trees at the end of the road. It was Bale who stepped forward first. Just one step. Enough to bring his face into the light from the library window. His expression was not the warm, easy smile she had learned to expect from him. It was something quieter, something that had put the playfulness down for a moment and was showing her what was underneath. "You read it," he said, not a question. "Yes," she said. Another silence, longer this time. "Are you afraid?" Jorah asked. His voice came out of the dark where he was still standing, low and even, the way he always spoke, like every word had been decided before it was released. Aurora thought about it honestly. "No," she said. Then, "I don't know what I am." Caden said nothing. He was still in the dark, but she could feel him looking at her with that deep, steady attention she had felt every day for 2 weeks and had been pretending she didn't feel. "Go home," Jorah said. "Sleep. We will be there in the morning." It was not unkind. It was not dismissive. It was the voice of someone who understood that some things needed a night between them and the next conversation. Aurora pulled her coat tighter. She nodded once. She walked home. She did not sleep. They were there when she opened the library in the morning. All 3, already waiting at the door. No explanation, no ceremony. Just there, the way the sun was there, and the way the cold morning air was there, as if their presence had stopped being a variable and become a fact. She let them in. She made no mention of the note or the dark lane or the 3 pairs of golden eyes that had followed her through her sleepless night and into her dreams when she finally drifted off near dawn. She went behind the desk. She opened her catalog. She began her morning. But everything was different, and they all knew it, and no one pretended otherwise. Jorah sat in his chair. He did not open a book. Bale did not make her laugh. He sat on the edge of the reading table with his arms folded and watched her move around the library with an expression that was warm and waiting and serious all at once. Caden stood at the window. The morning passed like that, full of something that had no name yet. Lena and Petra arrived just before noon. Aurora heard them coming before the door opened, Lena's voice carrying through the wood, bright and purposeful, the voice of someone who had spent the evening making a decision and had arrived to act on it. She had a half-second to prepare herself, and then the door was open, and both of them were inside, and the room had instantly become smaller. Lena looked at Bale and smiled, the good smile, the real one, and walked straight toward him with the confidence of a woman who had convinced herself last night that the feeling was mutual. "I was hoping you'd be here," she said. Her hand touched his arm lightly. "I was thinking, there's a lovely walk along the river this time of year. I could show you if you wanted." The library went very quiet. Bael looked at Lena's hand on his arm. Then he looked up at her face, and his expression was the kindest thing Aurora had ever seen on a person delivering information that was going to hurt. "Lena," he said gently. like her name was something he was handling carefully. "You're wonderful, genuinely. And in another life, I think you would absolutely destroy me." He smiled, soft, apologetic, completely honest. "But there is only one woman I came to this village for." He didn't look at Aurora. He didn't need to. Everyone in the room already knew. Lena's smile stayed on her face for 2 more seconds through sheer will. Then it faded, slowly, like something deflating. And what was left underneath was the particular expression of a woman who had just understood that she had misread everything. She turned her head. Her eyes found Aurora behind the desk. Aurora said nothing. She had nothing to say. She was gripping the edge of the desk with both hands and trying to look like someone who was not currently experiencing a significant internal event. Across the room, Petra had moved to the window where Caden stood. She was close to him, deliberately close, and she was saying something about the river too. Aurora caught pieces of it. "Have you seen the South Bank? The leaves are extraordinary right now." Caden let her finish. Then he turned from the window. He didn't speak to Petra. He looked directly across the entire length of the library at Aurora, and his face said everything his mouth wasn't saying, said it so clearly and so simply that even Petra, standing right beside him, eye close enough to touch, understood that she was not the person being spoken to. Petra stopped talking mid-sentence. She looked at Caden's face. She looked across the library at Aurora. She took one small step back. Jorah, at the reading table, had not moved, had not spoken, had simply been sitting there with the stillness of a man who was the answer to a question and knew it and was waiting for the question to finish being asked. He looked at no one except Aurora. He had been looking at no one except Aurora since the moment Lena and Petra walked in. It was that look that did it, because Lena saw it. She saw all 3 of them, Bale's gentle certainty, Caden's wordless declaration across the room, Jorah's absolute and unmistakable focus, and she put it together in the space of 3 seconds, and the last of her smile disappeared entirely. "I see," she said. The words were very small, very flat. And underneath them, Aurora could hear the thing that was not being said, the humiliation of it, the sting of having come in bright and hoping and being turned away, and the beginning of something else, something darker, moving underneath the hurt like a current under ice. Petra picked up her coat from the chair. Neither of them said goodbye. The door closed behind them.